All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Pass, you're familiar with, and happy to share with you a project that's been sort of ongoing for a while, a little under a year now in progression, how the relationships have built out to basically an organizational partnership here. We're going to use Paraguay as an example of some products that are generated from this, and then ways forward if we can build it out even further.
Jessica Jackson, you all know me. I'm the Senior Assessment Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist. And we also wanted to give an acknowledgement to Major Maritza Ruiz, who served as one of the data collectors. She has since moved on in her position as Chief of Global Health Engagement Total Course Integration, and she's moved over to Education and Training, but we did want to acknowledge that she contributed to this brief.
And where she continues to insert GHG, she just texted me.
Oh, did she? I have to text her back too, now that I think about it. So I'm not going to read the agenda to you because I do want to make sure that we have plenty of time at the end for the discussion piece of it. But I will say that we're going to power through this because there's quite a bit. We're just going to hit the highlights, right? I'm not going to translate every single graph or chart to you. If anyone is interested, you know where these slides are housed and you can look at them in more detail later. And with that, I'll pass it over to Lieutenant Colonel Pass.
Okay, so again, with the ongoing relationships, it's basically started out, actually, you introduced me to Colonel East way back in the day, some of the articles that he's been writing up as far as team composition in the GHG space. And so I kind of tried to build on that based on me going to ACC. That's where I was stationed initially. That's where I'm at right now. And then all I was told for that position was you're going to support AFCENT. You're going to support AFCENT. That's all I knew walking into it. And so now I called both of them and said, hey, we did sort of a quick needs assessment. Where do you need me at to support you? And AFCENT didn't really respond too well. They were good. AFSouth said, hey, we got work for you. So we moved forward, and that work is what we're going to show here today based on AM&E support. Again, the caveat is I'm not an AM&E expert, and I have needed and relied on those expertise from Jessica right here. So let's progress. Could, yeah. AFSouth, what AFSouth was able to do was actually procure some funds and then say, hey, we're going to do follow-up assessments for any of the GHG OHIs that we do. It's going to happen within 1 year. And so I said, wow, that's awesome. I know Colonel Chu was one of the first iterations of that. And he did like a .NOPF analysis and kind of recommended, hey, we're not truly capturing the intent of HCA money. And HCA money says in the DOTI, we need to be able to, one, show that there's some sort of medical readiness LOE, and then also what are the short and long-term impacts for the partner nation. So thinking, well, if we're going to develop some sort of ABD framework, it at least needs to encompass both of those. So we went up there to St. Lucia, we tried it out, and then I kind of pitched for a dedicated position to actually have someone on the team, this team composition, to focus without mission creep to really collect that data to prove that we're actually accomplishing medical readiness on the trips. And then also then, parsing out the other aspects, the short and long-term impacts, continuing the current 1 year, re-engagements with the country. So that's how you kind of control both ends of the aspect. I'm not big at my own daughter. It's cool. Okay, but there are limitations. Again, I don't have expertise. When I was there in St. Lucia for the first iteration of this is the most I could collect, right? It was just me building the plane loader, flying it. You guys being the experts of products, generation, strategic communication. I couldn't do that myself. I don't have the bandwidth, knowledge, or expertise in that area. So what we call this is essentially a hot mess. So moving forward, and having guided solutions through the leadership of Jessica here and that collaboration, bouncing back from some of my operational and tactical experiences, and then receiving her more academic and graphical product strategic messaging, we were able to get better vetted solutions and products. So like for this is something that at the end of the engagement, Colonel Gavin and the ASOM team are going to send this for each member that was involved into it. We have an account of daily accounts of their hours and the requirements here and how they checked it off, and then the net gain in that medical rating this after. And you shoot it out to the MCF commanders, and they say, "Oh yes, readiness team here. Let's stamp you for accredited training."
Okay.
All right.
So in looking at all of this data, the individual component was already covered, right? So the Air Force has a requirement that airmen and women have to fulfill the Comprehensive Medical Readiness Program, or CMRP, requirements. So what I was really interested in was group composition and how much of that CMRP could be achieved on a mission like in AMISTAD. So essentially what I did, I know I have all these methods up here, but I basically took a big piece of paper and I looked at all of the different checklists within each AFC. So for example, if it was BMED, I looked at all of the BMED folks who were there. I looked at which sections they were able to complete, and then I added up the required hours for those sections. Now, why hours? Because that was the metric that was already being used, and it also allowed me to see overages. For example, if someone, they only hit one section, but they did 300 hours, right? Then that's an overage, rather than just looking at the sections individually. I took the completed hours metric and then divided it over the total number of required hours for that CMRP and did the calculation for the completion rate. And once again, it answers the question on this specific mission, theoretically, how much of the CMRP checklist could one complete? And then of course, for the average completion rate, that's calculated just like you might imagine, adding up all the scores and then dividing by the number of AFCs present during the mission. A few caveats on this analysis. We went back and forth on which categories to include in this. So we did make the decision to exclude category 1 for family medicine, dentists, optometrists, and pediatric nurses, because they should theoretically already be up to date on those, and that should be current at all times. So I didn't necessarily exclude it. I gave them credit for it and just counted those hours and input it into the equation. For the nurses, categories A, hours required for like registered nurse licensure, things of that nature, they should have already hit those. So we took that out as well. But like I said, in all cases, we made the assumption that category 1 requirements should always be up to date. And there is a reverse of that in wave 2, which I'll discuss shortly. So now we're going to talk about just how we packaged all of this in terms of like an outbrief demo of how to kind of put all of this data together. So the storyboards look very familiar to everyone in this room. It's the main method of communicating how a mission went. Down here, we have our mission objectives, which for this one, specifically reducing stress on partner nation health systems, and then also enhancing DoD and partner nation medical capability through the info exchange. So we're recommending you start with the high level overview, and then you can dig a little bit deeper into wave 1 versus wave 2 for the various missions. Now of note here, the good thing is they were able to incorporate those completion rates for each AFSC that I provided to them into the storyboard. So it goes a little bit further than just the 5 WHs, but now we have a little data sprinkled in there as well. So if you recall back to the slide that Ben showed where it was just overarching numbers, and it was like 38 people, 4,081 total hours. And I kept asking him, what does that mean? Who did what? So essentially, I was able to break it out by AFSC. So for wave 1, if you were interested in dentistry, you had a good time. You were just having a ball, the time of your life. If we looked at which AFSCs contributed the most hours across the CMRP categories, for category 1, there were a total of 2,326 hours, and most of those were comprised of contributions by dentists and dental techs. It was primarily a dental focused mission, I believe. Same over here for the CMRP hours completed. For CMRP 2 hours completed, dental techs and dentists had the lion's share of that. And you can see up here, just if we look within it, the dental techs were jamming. So like I said, looking at the completion rates, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just hit the ones of interest. The dental technicians, theoretically up to 58%, and that's because they had a lot of the Cat 1 places they were hitting, a little bit less of the Cat 2. For the optometry techs and the optometrists, they had some nice gains there. with most of the emphasis for optometrists being on eye injury and providing care in austere locations, which obviously they were in Paraguay, so they all would have hit that requirement. For family medicine, they also had a good day. And this is one of those places where I said there's overages if you look at what they did in terms of hours. So they only worked across 2 requirements in CAT 2, which was acute care and patient movement. But they had something like 300 hours or something. Like it was way over the requirement for it. So that bumped up their CMRP completion rate. Don't have to speak about dentists. It was primarily a dentist, a dental mission. And then for the BMETs, a little bit less for them to actually do during the first wave, as well as medical material. And then the medical service corps had some decent gains. And I will say that when we were talking about this, Captain Perkins, who isn't on the call today, she suggested 50% is just a performance target. Like it's a theoretical one, it's an arbitrary one. It could be set at any level you like, but we just wanted to have something there to compare to. For patient-specific data, we were also able to get this. Lieutenant Colonel Pass collected this separate from what he did with the CMRPs. So if we look at patient gender distribution by site, we see that it's mostly comprised of women. And in terms of patient age distribution, it was mostly adults. Less so with pediatric populations, which, yeah, is what it is. And then he also collected some gender specific data, which was the first time we really did that, trying to make that push and connection with women, peace and security by at least making the effort to acknowledge and collect that data. And what we saw here is that the women healthcare providers constituted the majority of the workforce. And that was for both the partner nation and the US military personnel that were down there. And then interestingly, all of the clinics that they worked with had women in positions of the director. Right. So interesting information, still looking for ways ahead and ways by which we could, expand on collecting that information, how we can use it. But I thought that this was a really nice step forward. For wave 2, there was a little bit difference in focus. So for this one, they did everything. The BMETs killed it. The health services management folks killed it. Medical materials, not so much. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the gaps. Family medicine, much lower than it was on wave 1. And for this one, I had to do the opposite. So for wave 1, I excluded category 1. For this particular mission, all they did was category 1, right? They didn't get any category 2 requirements met. So I had to count it the other way. And even with that, it was still only about 21% completion rate. And clinical nurses, I'll talk about that one here shortly, but 1%, very, very low for what they were able to actually do on this type of mission. So like I said, family medicine, optometrists, and dentists still achieve those category 1 requirements while being current. So even though I gave them credit for it, I was actually able to see on the checklist that they had marked off some of that stuff as well. And that's for both. Well, for wave 1, not for wave 2. And so in that regard, there was reinforcement of that category. So it gets you to thinking about team composition and training requirements, right? If you're going to send someone on this mission and you're looking at if they're red, yellow, or green, or how ready they are, then you might want to do a little bit more matching personnel with mission, right? If it's important for people to get CAT 2, CAT 3, or whatever up to date, then we need to be looking at what they've already done and matching the mission and the objectives with the personnel. And then there were differences in mission focus. So on wave 2, they pursued a lot of CBT, computer-based trainings. There was a lot more hustling up and trying to find ways to add value or to complete those CMRPs outside of what was happening at the clinics. And so that's why you saw, those huge rates for some of the categories, because rather than just kind of letting it unfold, there was a bit of a different focus. For the gaps, there were definitely differences in data collection techniques between waves 1 and 2. For example, you saw I had that nice overview board. I had patient data and all of that good stuff for wave 1. Wave 2 backslid a little bit and just kind of check things off of the CMRP. And so essentially what that means is that you put your initials and the date something happened by it and nothing else. So you did this, 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 and this. Whereas for wave one, we were able to break things out a little bit more, and I was able to see more clearly what happened. Planning and coordination are key to enabling greater completion of the CMRPs, like I mentioned with the nurses. The biggest thing was a lot of their requirements were contingent on inpatient care. And so this was a mission where there were clinics. They weren't going to get any hospital hours on this. Now, they could have if they had planned a little bit better ahead of time. And that's one of the things that Major Ruiz pointed out, is that the nurses could have, done a lot more had they thought a little bit about team composition and who was going where. And then there's also a limited ability for the CMRPs to measure other readiness gains. So for example, in wave 1 and 2, like with the BMETs and with the optometry treks, some of them were doing translation. Some of them were providing assistance to the other specialties and stepping in that regard. Some folks were, going above and beyond to lift and tote and whatnot. But there's no way to capture that on the CMRPs because right now it's, did you do it? Yes or no? How many hours did you do it? If you did it at all. And so there are also some other readiness gains that happen in this sort of environment that we're not capturing through the traditional methods because the CMRP is very narrowly focused on just checking the boxes. And with that, we were able to imagine a few courses of action for moving forward.
So the goal is here, we're going to list to where do we go from here, right? We've pitched over a while this course of the year that, hey, we've had some gains as far as a proof of concept of what it's like to have a dedicated position for AM&E or an AM&E champion or a data collector. But do we stop there? This is also, the tactical stop is what I call it because it's tactical AM&E. This also requires a lot of effort. Sort of pending on the back of a deadline here where because of the successes now for the fiscal year 25 of Lamont, Africa is actually taking control of it. They're going to have 4 different countries that they're targeting in their activities. They've now set aside one position for this AM&E. And so we're now in a position where, okay, well, we got to train these people up to do exactly what we did in the concept phase. So that's going to require some playbooks to scale up and support this effort. It's awesome that they dedicated those resources towards it, but we also have to formalize what we've been working on all along so that this is really just streamlined. Here I want to say, AM&E, there's some formalized frameworks out there, but for me, I think we really got to modernize it to where, again, those minimum requirements are there for the DOTI. And then how do we really operationalize this? How do we functionalize this? So this is sort of the proposal here where you'll see these different colors we'll talk about later, but you're basically dealing with roles, you're dealing with timelines, and you're dealing with products. And if you have those and those are partitioned out, kind of like a contract, people will know what they're doing and they're going to support it through inter-organizational relationships. And that's basically what we've been doing here. Again, you can kind of read into those, but all of the highlighted areas basically represent the products that we think can support this mission overall as a whole throughout these pre-deployment surveys, which then feed into something like medical options, and that can be a part of the playbook. Give it to another node, a C2, who can really, do the knowledge management piece. There you go. All right, but then also, okay, what's the role of actually making the country briefs, prepping the teams to actually go out there, and again, training the people actually collecting the data, what do the post-mission products look like, and then it's a cycle that goes on and on, getting that feedback from the partner nation. So much can be built into an infrastructure here. Yeah, going back, I don't know how to go back. Yeah.
Click off.
Okay, so with the colors on here, these are things like he's going to get to it in terms of the next slide of matching role with product. But we went through here and kind of looked at some of these things that could happen within each of these cycles as it's embedded into the mission prep pieces of it in the execution. So the red would be things that our partners like AFSouth would handle. Blue are things that we could support and contribute to, like that training of AM&E champions, curriculum building, focus groups, the readiness analysis, which what I just presented. And then this one here is purple because capture training accomplishments can be spread across both of those entities. They capture it, and then we think about knowledge management.
Okay, so then here we're getting to the piece where we're matching products with the players. So you have the stakeholders that are invested in this collective AM&E effort. This is just a notional concept. Of course, if this then is approved and agreed upon and we'll move forward, this may change a little bit here, depending on the capacities of each of those players. Let's give you a second to look at it. So again, if all of these, and maybe there could be a connection to Socium, the official record here. And that's when we're getting into the next phase. This is just a poem of how even at this tactical level, it requires a lot of effort. Again, in March and February, that's when the next Lamont is going to occur. There then will also be an iteration of AMISTAD, which is the other big set of HGA activities that South has. And that's going to be more so in the summertime. We can have lessons learned from Lamont and then update those for that AMISTAD. So this is all really just on the tactical AM&E level. COA 2 would be to really expand this out even further. So we have what we talked about here, but how do we actually connect these activities with South strategy, with Southcom strategy? And that's where we're getting into the bigger picture, that this is just a small portion of the bigger AM&E ecosystem or universe here, where we can then talk about indicators. And being on the ground there, like, oh, well, there's other things. This gave us access into the country and repeated touches over the years. But hey, there's also, for some of these countries, there's a Taiwanese aspect, right? Different LOEs that create increasing complexity in our relationships, increasing complexities of, hey, how many PDSSs are we doing, and are they expanding by the countries? Are these HGAs, which are primarily mill-sieve, then going to mill-to-mill? Right? And what information are we gathering to make those connections if they do have a standing military? So a lot can grow from this that I suggest should be monitored maybe at more of that AFSOUth, that Southcom level. And again, a lot of effort is needed down here at the tactical AM&E, but at the operational piece, this can go on and on. And that's sort of the support. What products would that look like that we would recommend support and advisement from CGH? All right. I think we're running out of time here, but that's the big takeaway here. We went from a concept, dedicated AM&E position, now starting to get scaled up. We have some do-outs that are coming to prepare the AFRIC and their teams as they have their own positions as well. And so a lot of support, I think, would be needed for that effort for this next year. But then further from that, again, are we going to invest in the effort of building out the full AM&E framework ecosystem for higher order objectives connected to the strategic? That's all we have. I think this concept is great to write upon as far as how are we operationalizing or accelerating AM&E through organizational partnerships. And I think that's the key message here.